might find time for us to get together tonight. I'm going to play you a couple of tunes. Let's get into it. Good. Let's get into it.
Hi, hey, welcome back if you're not new here. We're gonna do an artist study on Mark Tansey today, so let's just hop right into it. I'm starting off here by laying down just a nice toned wash. Always tone your paper. I mean, you don't have to always tone your paper if that's like not the vibe you're going for, but always good practice to not start on white paper. It helps you see your values a lot better. So we're just gonna lay down a nice wash of blue.
Let's get in.
Okay, so my boy Mark Tansey, born in 1949, I believe in San Francisco, went to the Arts Center College of Design in Los Angeles in the late 60s, early 70s, and then went to Hunter College in New York. Came from a family of artists, art lovers, grew up in museums. The man knows his art. I honestly don't remember how I found out about Mark Tansey. It was probably Pinterest, because I find all of my contemporary artists on Pinterest. I think what initially struck me so much about his work was the grandiosity of it. The way he plays with scale is so effective, and when you have that monochrome on top of that, it just makes it that much harder to kind of ignore the subject matter. I really was drawn to that about his work. I love a good high contrast piece too. Oof. The Mark Tansey painting that I'm painting today is called The Key. It was painted in 1984, I believe. Oil on canvas. She's massive. She's like 5 feet tall, which isn't like massive, but if I had a 5 foot tall painting in my apartment, you'd notice it. I'm doing this piece entirely in gouache. Mark Tansey works primarily in oils, but it's a sketchbook, so we're gonna do it in gouache. It's a painting of him and his wife in like a garden at night. It's kind of a funny piece if you think about it, because like you can clearly tell even from behind that his wife is pissed off and he's like drunk and fumbling for the keys to the door. We've all been there. It happens. This painting also has a lot of kind of allegorical meaning as well, beyond its more like literal what the painting's of. Arthur Danto talks about how this piece is more a representation of being an artist in itself and what it takes to kind of enter into the canon, more or less. The gates are actually Lorenzo Ghiberti's Gates of Paradise from the Florence Baptistry, which is like right next to the Duomo. You know the Duomo. Ghiberti is important because he's one of the guys that was like the first dudes to be doing it in the Renaissance. He was like before Leo and Leo's time, Michelangelo's time, that whole whatnot. He was like one of the first dudes kicking off the Renaissance. It almost kind of makes it look like Mark Tansey is trying to open up his own sort of Renaissance by getting through these gates. But he also is kind of struggling with just the looming dominance of art history. When it comes to referencing Renaissance artwork in this picture particularly, Ghiberti's not the only guy that Mark Tansey's pulling from. The woman in the corners also evokes the legacy of Giotto, who was one of the first people in the Renaissance to paint someone with their back turned to the picture. Like traditionally you didn't do that. It was kind of profile and then eventually dead on, but never back turned. That's the first thing you see in this painting, is that woman with her back turned, because she's so bright white, because there's essentially like very little paint even on the canvas there. It's immediately where our eye goes to, and then directs us straight up towards the man opening the gate. So you kind of have this almost linear history of art in this one bottom half of the piece. You go from Giotto, who came before Ghiberti, into Ghiberti and the gates of the baptistry, gates of paradise. And it's kind of like, here he is trying to unlock art history, like the tradition of art and painting, but it's like judgy and there's pressure and it's hard, and I don't know, there's a lot of tension in this work specifically that I think is conveyed so well, especially once you know what's going on. Like, I know that's kind of one of the harder things about critical art theory is like, how the fuck am I supposed to know any of that though if you don't read an essay about it by Arthur Danto? I think what I like about Mark is that I can read that tension without knowing all that. What he's painting in a literal sense in this piece is a human relationship and dynamic, but he's using that to represent him and his work. Danto also remarks that because this is such a high contrast painting and the way he uses light and dark, it's almost Caravaggio-esque in a way, which I definitely agree with, and again ties super well into that narrative progression, linear progression through history and Italian Renaissance art. This is ultimately about what it's like to be an artist making art in the context of the tradition of art making, and it was a really fun one to learn from.
Let's get into it.
Anyway, let's talk about his technique first. So Mark Tansey works, like I said, primarily in oil paintings. He works alla prima, which means that he can only paint when the paint is wet, which boggles the mind to me because I am very much an indirect oil painter in the sense that I do a lot of very thin little layers. He works alla prima, meaning that he just puts down the paint and has, I believe it's 6 hours roughly, to work with the medium until that's it. And then if the paint's dried, now you can't go back in and rework it unless you want to scrape the whole thing off. He works the way that the fresco painters did in the Renaissance, in that he just goes section by section, but that helps him, meet that time criteria. I also love that when you can just see the painting kind of grow from one side of the canvas to the other when you work like that, versus building up and you're like, okay, I've done 3 passes, I've done 5 passes, is it enough passes? He works in an additive and reductive style, meaning that he puts the paint on and wipes it off, scrapes it away. You get really nice thin kind of glazing and can make really interesting lighting technique with that, which you can obviously see in his work. That's how you get a lot of the luminosity in these paintings, is by just using the white of the ground, essentially, the canvas, to kind of pop through. Oil paints are so freaking cool, man. Ugh, I miss oil painting so much. Anyway, a key component of Mark Tansey's work is that he utilizes René Magritte's 8 methods of bringing about the quote-unquote crisis of the object, which is a lot of words all at once. Essentially what this is, for anyone who doesn't know, René Magritte was one of the big painters in the Surrealist movement. He's the dude with the apple for the head and the bowler hat. He had written, I guess, more or less a manifesto on the crisis of the object and kind of representational versus non-representational painting. He had this idea of the crisis of the object, where the object being a very representational thing in painting, and how to kind of take that and subvert that idea and make something new and not necessarily representational, using representational objects. I may be way off here. More or less the gist of it. And those 8 methods are isolation, which is taking an object out of its original context; modification, which is changing the object kind of slightly so that it's sort of unfamiliar and off a little bit. Hybridization, which is combining two dissimilar objects so that we recognize pieces of each but not the two of them together as a whole. Scale change, making objects appear kind of unusual in size. We see that in this painting specifically with the gate being so massive. Accidental encounters, which is juxtaposing objects not normally seen together. Double image puns, like Dali's double images, using the subject of a painting to kind of suggest a silhouette or a structure not clearly defined, but still kind of perceivable. Sort of think creepypasta vibes. You can see it in the woods, but you're like, what the fuck is that? Paradox, which is creating a contradiction within the frame so that things that can't exist are shown to exist. Again, seen super well here. There's not a massive gilded gate in the middle of the forest, presumably anywhere. Another good example of this is Marguerite's This Is Not a Pipe painting, which for all you girlies out there that read The Fault in Our Stars in middle school, that's the shirt they were talking about. And last but not least is double viewpoints, which is where you kind of show things from different perspectives at the same time. That was a lot of art history info all at once, and it's not going to get any better for the rest of the video, so let's get into it. Let's talk about content. But first we gotta throw in a little tape peel here real quick, because it's the internet.
Let's get into it. Let's get into it.
For starters, Mark Tansey has a lot of visual humor in his work, but like, again, with the Marguerite thing, he is really focused on this idea of representation and how we define painting, what makes a painting, more or less. He's known to argue that representation has functions other than just capturing the quote-unquote real, and argues that his work is about how different realities interact with each other and not just kind of as their own standalone things. Another one of the things I love about him, I obviously love a lot of things because I'm choosing to study him, the way he roots his work in traditional art history and mastery is something that I really enjoy. It's something I try and do a lot in my work. He pulls a lot from the Renaissance and that kind of legacy that you see in representational painting, because that was the time that they were doing a lot of representational painting. That was kind of when we achieved peak representational painting. So that shows through in a lot of his subject matter. He has a great quote about this in which he says, "In my work, I'm searching for pictorial functions that are based on the idea that the painted picture knows itself to be metaphorical, rhetorical, transformational, and fictional. I'm not doing pictures of things that actually exist in the world. The narratives never actually occurred. In contrast to the assertion of one reality, my work investigates how different realities interact and abrade. And the understanding is that the abrasions start with the medium itself." This is so interesting. This just gets into like the meat of what I like about art. His paintings act like more like collages of reality than they do like photographs of reality. And that's something I find really interesting because you really do open up an entire new world of narrative and representational possibility by doing that. I know artist studies and like master studies and stuff like that are meant to help you learn technique and traditional skills, technical skills. But I don't really see people talking as much about studying artists for content and for concept. And so while I do have a great appreciation for Mark Tansey's technical abilities and the way he renders work. I'm more interested in the way he constructs image. I think that that is something that's just really fascinating, and it's something I'd like to bring into my own work. And the beauty of this artist study is I've given myself the space to look into that and really pinpoint and nail down what I find intriguing about his work and what I want to bring into my own, which is the whole point of an artist study in the first place. Anyone out there who's like, oh, I should do an artist study, next time you do an artist study, do a conceptual one versus a technical one and see what you find.
Let's get in.
This was a long one. Sorry about it. I hope it wasn't super boring and didn't come across like a university lecture on critical art theory, but I hope maybe you learned something, got some enjoyment out of it. Now you know what Marguerite's 8 theories of bringing about the conflict of the object are, and now you too can go into your work and bring about the conflict of the object. Let me know about it. Anyway, if this didn't bore you to tears, leave a like, subscribe. I'll probably ramble about something else for 20 minutes sometime soon. So maybe it'll be educational. Maybe it won't be. But maybe it'll be entertaining, and that seems to be enough. So stick around, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.
Let's get into it.